Yes.
Define normal though.
Yeah.
It's my answer to these things every time. Define normal.
I must admit, I don't watch Audit Committee. Who was in it last time? Paul Anderson was in it, wasn't he, last time?
I say,
Maybe he wasn't. I can't remember. No, who or was it? Sam and Becca, maybe. Sat down the end.
yeah.
Oh, well, I mean.
I have apologies from Councillor Len Ellis-Brown and Councillor Warwick Hellawell.
Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is to approve, as correct, the minutes of the meeting held on 18th of September. Do we all agree? Agree? Okay, thank you. We'll take that as agree. The next item is declarations of members' interests. Anyone got any possible conflicts with what we're doing today? Okay, then it comes on to the announcements from myself. Right, okay. First thing, we do have an exempt item on the agenda. So, members, please note that item 8 on the agenda contains an exempt item. It's on page 159 and 160 of the private agenda pack. The Director of Resources will present his report, which can be discussed. I will then propose that we go into an exempt session. Any member of the public will be asked to leave, and the audio minutes and YouTube recording will be paused at that time. At the end of the discussion in relation to the exempt item, we will go back into the public session and finalise the noting of the agenda item. Okay, I'll just give a quick resume of what I've been up to. I've been attending some LGA courses again, understanding local government audit committees, LGA finance course. Coming up, I've got Auditing and Scrutiny Chairs development session on Friday, together with Paul Clark of the Oversight and Overview and Scrutiny Committee up in Smith Square, London. And we've got a regional audit committee meeting coming up on the 5th of December. And this is the one which is cancelled from October. Okay, we can move on now, I think. So we'll go to item 5, the accounts. I think if it's agreed, we'll go with Liz first, if that's okay with you.
Brilliant, thank you, Chair, through you. So good evening for those who don't know me. I'm the outgoing external auditor for the 22-23 year, and obviously you probably met Hassan, who's coming in for 23-24 year. So on the agenda today, you obviously have the 22-23 financial statements, which I'll let Finance talk about in a bit, but you also have our audit completion report. And that's basically to do with, obviously we've recently had the legislation has been enacted to be able to do the disclaimer audit reports for the up to the 22-23 financial year on the 13th of September. And then more recently, last week, the new National Audit Office Code of Audit Practice was issued as well, and therefore that now has set everything in motion for us to be able to audit and issue those disclaimer audit reports. So we've completed the following work in relation to 22-23. So the value for money, you've obviously had the value for money interim report at a previous agenda, but that's included in this report as well, and that's just to say there was no updates to that. There was nothing arising in the council since my last BFM interim report that would need to be reflected and change anything that had occurred in 22-23, the arrangements. And then we've got the financial statement section, and we've performed minimum audit procedures, obviously linked to the disclaimer audit report in line with the International Standards of Auditing. And then we're moving under now that statutory instrument that's been under the Accounts and Audit Regulations, but now we've moved to the disclaimer audit report. And that's to say, in this report, it sets out that it was nothing to do with Horsham District Council at all, nothing to do with finance, there's no weaknesses or any internal control issues that I'm aware of that has led to that disclaimer process. And it's purely to do with the local government backstop and the preset of the local government. So there's no fault of any of your officers that are sat in the room today or in your financial statements. It's to do with the resource capacity within EY and the rest of the audit firms in getting to that position. So in line with that, we've done some scope and strategy procedures, which is around the planning, obviously just understanding insurance letters from those charge governments, from the chair of this committee, from your director of finance, and actually from some of the other people in the organisation. And the work set out is in here. There's nothing really to say on the accounts in the fact that actually they were as robust as ever. There's a cover report from finance that sets out some of the kind of variances that we identified, but there's nothing in them that causes me concern. So although I am issuing a qualified disclaimer audit report, it's through no fault of the council. That's probably all I want to say, and if there's any questions to kind of answer on that basis.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come straight in, Sam? Before any questions?
So thank you, Liz, for the audit, or the the audits passed. The statements of accounts have been included in the pack and were prepared and published in draft by the 31st of May 2023. The committee have been briefed on the statements, and we're now here to approve them and the letter of representation so that they can be signed by the chairman and the director of resources. Does anyone have any questions on statements, or for myself or Liz?
Any questions, members? Paul?
Yeah, I mean, questions for Liz, I suppose, and you may not be able to answer this, and maybe in an unfair position, but two things occurred to me. Obviously, that I understand the reasons for this, when opinion and so on. And obviously, there was now a few. So, without wishing to actually participate, 23 or 4, are we looking at another disclaimer potentially, or at some point will we move to accept all and then sure and fair? Is there any sense of timeline that you might expect as a council, if you like, to get back to a normal, true and fair opinion that we want to see?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The FRC published a guide, I think it was either early this month or at the end of last month, setting out really clearly kind of that timeline. And yes, there is a knock-on impact, obviously under the FRC guide and the ICAW's rules. That 22-23 is disclaimed. 23-24 is also fully disclaimed. So you are having a full audit undertaken, and obviously there's been questions raised that some councils aren't having an audit and some are. And then it's about starting that rebuild assurance process. But effectively, it takes 3 years to unwind a disclaimed audit report. So you'll be disclaimed in 23-24 fully. In 24-25, your disclaimer will be obviously on the opening balances that have been brought forward because you have no assurance over those. And the EY approach, which obviously the person taking over, we can talk more about, but effectively our approach will be to rebuild as much assurance as possible in relation to your balance sheet. So obviously that's then the bit that we're trying to rebuild the assurance over quicker because the IME will just flow through. Then in 25-26, it will be the opening balance sheet position. So kind of like what will be your closing third balance sheet would be your year end. That then will be a reduced disclaimer, if you get me, that it will be just on those opening balances. And then in 26, 27, yes, that will be the first unqualified, back to being true and fair, unqualified audit report. And it sets out in there, that would be the quickest any organisation could rebuild, unless you did a full audit back to the closing 21-22 accounts, which we've said is not possible, and therefore we're taking the 3-year period.
Can I ask a question regarding, so we didn't have a full audit this year, obviously. Do we get a reduction in fees proportionally?
It's a great question, one I'm asked everywhere. So there's obviously, so from your perspective, you haven't had an audit and therefore you feel your audit fee will be much less. We've obviously undertaken a significant amount of work to do the value for money, to do some of the limited audit procedures we've done, and obviously that assurance process using all of our professional practice team with consultations and like that. The PSAA, the good news for you, is that we don't set that fee. The PSAA are responsible for determining the audit fee that is appropriate for bodies to pay. So EY will be submitting their fees of what it's cost us to do those audits. We'll submit that to PSAA, and then they are determining an approach for all the firms as to how they will judge the work that's been undertaken and then set those fees. We're not yet aware of how PSAA are going to do that. So to be honest, in all honesty, sat here tonight, the answer is I don't know. I know what it's cost, well, I don't know what it's cost us exactly, but I will know what it cost us, and then that's what we'll submit. But what we get from PSAA and what we'll be asked to pay is unknown at this date.
So that will come down to us eventually. Just for reference, the PSAA is the Public Sector Audit Appointments. Just a reference to members. Paul, question?
Actually, no, I was actually going to pay you.
Can I quickly ask Paul if you could just move the microphone closer?
Yeah, I was just going to make a positive comment about the value for money section. As a new independent member, I actually found the commentary in that section quite helpful and positive. And it's also positive that you didn't identify any significant risks or any significant weaknesses in the council's arrangements for value for money. So, yes, accept the disclaimer opinion, and you can't say the account's true and fair, but I think, certainly for me, I hope for the committee and the council, there is some assurance about the value for money arrangements and the outcome of the work you carried out on that. So, I just want to draw attention to that and to balance, to say I actually thought that was a helpful section.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Okay, thank you very much. So now, members, we are asked to approve the statement of accounts. Could I have your agreement on this? Would you raise your hand to agree? If you... Right, thank you. Right, so we now move on to the other side. Into the internal audit, and I asked Reem to give us her report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, this is our standard quarterly report, and this report gives you an update on all of the audits finalised during the second quarter of this financial year, during which we issued 4 final reports. I'll run through them very, very quickly. The Capitol Theatre, obviously this was done prior to the recent announcement of the change in project, essentially. We were able to provide reasonable assurance. Just to let you know, given the recent updates, we will look at including something in next year, the 2025-26 audit plan, but that will be risk assessed against other priority areas for the council. So we may do some further work, but we will keep an eye on it anyway through our standard liaison meetings. Alcohol licensing was a partial assurance. Just to highlight, this was an audit that was requested by management because they sensed they knew that there were some issues within the team. We were happy to work with management to have a look at how things were operating. We formalised that in a report which management were happy with, and we will continue to track those actions, which I've mentioned to you before. All actions that we agree with management, we will track them actively. Also, we will carry out a follow-up audit of this area in the next financial year. Member interests, reasonable assurance, there weren't any great comments to make there, and cash and bank, which is one of the key financials that the council, we were able to give substantial assurance to. In terms of our performance, we're starting to catch up. If I could just draw your attention to paragraph 4.2, the audits in progress, we've since added to that list. So this links in with our KPIs and the performance of our team. We are catching up. We're still very slightly behind on delivery of the plan for this point in the year. However, I've now called in extra resources from across our service. So the additional audits that are now underway are payroll, project management, more broadly across the whole council, and risk management. So I'm pleased to say that we're actually delivering over 70% of the plan at this point in time. That's all I really had to say, but I'm happy to take any questions.
So we're moving ahead quite well now to 70%, so there should be no issue towards the final. Okay. Thank you. Any questions, members? Paul?
Just one question really on the Capitol Theatre. I'm not particularly familiar with the project, other than what I've seen in the media about Given the potential changes to the project, is that something that will feature in the internal audit programme, and if so, when?
So we're actually coming up to our audit planning cycle now, when we'll start looking at which audits to include in the next financial year. The capital is already on that list. It's a different type of project now, as there's significantly less spend potentially. It's a, if you like, a scaled back version. So what we will actually do is compare it to the other items on that list, and it's something I'll be setting up with this committee as well to discuss areas that you'd like to perhaps be audited next year. There are other major projects going on at the council that may rank higher in the risk in the scheme of things, so we may prioritise it. We will, no matter what, though, keep an eye on the capital, and it's part of my role as I meet all of the directors very regularly. I like to know what's keeping them awake at night. They like to know what I'm a bit worried about, because I'm more independent, I might see things that perhaps they don't. So there are other projects that we may focus on, but the capital will remain on my conversation list with everyone, and at any point we may conduct another audit.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? No? Nothing to audit? No, I'm quite satisfied. Thank you. Thank you for your attendance. And we're asked to note, get my little script sheet out, asked to note the report. Okay, councillors? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we now move on to agenda item 7, which is the annual governance statement action plan. And I ask the Director of Finance, Dominic, to give his report, please.
Thank you. So this is just the sort of the midway or half-year snapshot of our progress against the plan from 23-24 that we do during 24-25. And there are 4 items on there which we have updated in the table. And it's pleasing to be able to report that some of those are well underway and in progress, and are on target across those 4 different areas to deliver the actions that we had set out.
Any questions, members?
Yes, could I just seek clarification? You have under RAG Ratus red the capital refurbishment project. Is that still in that position of in light of the changes?
Do you want the right report?
I think you might be an item agenda.
Sorry, apologies.
That's all right.
I'll come back to that later.
You've given me time to prepare my answers.
Okay, there's just four items, and that's progressing, and the review of the constitution I'm well aware of is going on as well in the background. Okay, thank you, Don. We're asked to again note the contents. Okay, so thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 8, risk management. Now this is the one with the exempt item. So as mentioned earlier, Director of Resources will present his report and we can discuss non-exempted items only at this stage. We will hold back on the exempt item until we get there, and I will read a bit of text. Thank you. So I ask Dom again to give us his report.
Thank you, Chairman. So there are still 6 risks that are high risk, although one has been sort of swapped out, if you like. So one has been slightly reduced in terms of its risk, and that is on the food waste. Now we have ordered the food caddies and some of the vehicles in there, so the risk is sort of reducing. It's still a risk, actually, implementation, but we should have the supplies and the goods to be able to deliver it, should they turn up, of course. So that one's dropped out of there, but obviously the capital refurbishment project, which we have changed in scope, we have put into the red risk category. It was always going to be a red risk anyway. In fact, this snapshot reflects the position as it was at the end of the quarter, rather than what we subsequently know now, where actually things have changed. So in fact, what we will need to do is go back and update this risk for however we intend to take that project forward. It's quite difficult to do that at the moment because we're not entirely sure exactly how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. It feels as if we are going to do more sort of phases of this rather than one big closure. We'll do some smaller closures and do things in periods of time that may stretch across 2 or 3 years. There's still a risk to that, of course, and it will remain on the risk register until we work out how and when and how much we're going to spend, etc. So it will be revisited and updated.
Any further questions? Paul?
Yes, on the risk for funding from government for quarterly update, talked about budgets. So I was just wondering what impact the budget statement will have on council. I'm thinking potentially the increase in the national food consumption, which will kick in from that rate, which would do that compared to the cost of capital, which like the NHS, for example, won't be reimbursed or will it, or is it unclear?
Well, it's unclear. So there is talk of it being reimbursed. The cost of the council could be in the region of about £500,000 a year. And government often says it will fund these things, and sometimes government starts off with that intention, and then suddenly you find 2 or 3 years later that that funding has been eroded away and you're left holding that cost. So until we see it in black and white in writing in our settlement, which will be the week before Christmas probably, we don't actually know exactly how much and for how long we're going to get this money for, if indeed we do. And that's obviously just the direct pressure to us. We have the indirect pressure, don't we, for suppliers who will be suffering in a similar way, and it's quite possible that they come back to us to either try and renegotiate something, or in future contracts that are let to us, they'll be pushing up their prices as well. So we'll see that price inflation feeding through, and I can't sit here and quantify what that might be, but if costs are going up by 5 or 6% to people, then they're likely to push that on to the cost to us, 5 or 6%. So we will feel it directly and indirectly too.
Okay. I note the.
Sorry, just a quick question on the government settlement. Obviously, you're expecting something early next year, but no idea whether it's going to roll to a year or how much.
So we will find out our draft settlement before Christmas. I think it's the week of the 16th of December, but it will be a single year settlement for that year. Government has helpfully indicated that they will look at multi-year settlements, and there will be some sort of exercise of consultation at some point. It's likely to be late spring or summer, that will give us the following year, hopefully 2 or maybe even 3 years worth of funding all set out for us, which will help us in terms of planning to have a little bit more certainty. So it's a 1 year and then hopefully for 2 or 3 years.
Any further questions?
I'm kind of lost. Just a moment, we were looking for.
We're just looking at the table, and we're trying to identify what item 25 is, which is
Very high.
very high and critical. Possible to provide us with a description of that. Pages are
141.
so page 141 is the funding.
So I think you're referring to the sort of template scorecard.
Yes.
So it's not actually a specific risk. That would be the risk calculated should it be critical and very high.
Got you.
Oh, okay.
So each of those values, it's sort of that would be the worst corner to be in, thankfully, at the moment, there's no risk that's currently sitting there. So the table that you might want to refer to, and which does show that, I think is on page 137. And they are our risks plotted against that same template. Correction, sorry, it's 138.
Oh, nice to see all members are organised. Yeah. Yeah.
May I ask a
Yeah.
question? 006, which is non-compliance with control procedures. Under the risk description, it says officers are either unaware of expected controls or do not comply with control procedures. My question is, if officers are employed and they've got a job description and they've got a set of objectives, won't they already know those expected controls? I can't, in my head I'm thinking, how would there ever be a situation where they wouldn't know what controls they're working to?
This is, of course, theoretical, isn't it? So we would hope that everyone would understand their controls, but if you're training someone who's new, they might not have learned things all the time. So we say that this could happen. Occasionally it does happen. We like it not to happen.
Sorry, so you're basically saying that this risk relates to new people?
Not necessarily. It could be changing roles. You could be doing something different. You could be learning something for the first time. You could be experienced and then still picking up something new. You're not going to know everything the first time you try anything. But we hope that there'll be oversight and help and support, etc., to train people.
Because
that's the likeliest time. Or sometimes just people forget. Not deliberate.
So we've got that in the sort of amber region, as I call it. There was no real way of actually moving it down to green and such. I would have thought. Unless you have.
No. And sometimes we just don't have the control in place, which is why we have internal audit to help us spot something that we haven't done at all. And they come along and very helpfully point that out, and then we can try and get control in there. That's why it's in amber.
Any further questions?
Just one question, it's not green now, it's about domestic food waste. Is there any news or any like that we're going to get any funding towards that from government?
I don't believe they've confirmed any figures on the revenue side. So they gave us some capital funding, which was about 2/3 of the cost that we think it's going to cost us. But we're waiting again for that confirmation. It may or may not come through in this year's settlement. It might turn up at some point next year. We're just informed. They have a formula for working out these things, or they certainly did on the capital side. I expect a similar process on the revenue side that will leave us perhaps short-funded again. That's already built into our MTFS, of course, so we're expecting that position to happen.
Any other questions? All I can say is I note that we still have the benefit subsidy claim issues there, and that is the assurance regime getting better so that we're going to be able to minimise that risk in future?
We're certainly I wasn't a fire alarm or something at this point. We're certainly putting in a lot of resource and effort to try and perfect something that is a very highly complex area. It's difficult not to make mistakes in, and which is why government tolerates a certain amount of error in there. We're still finding though, of course, one or two big items, which is what we found at the start of the year, one from the census previous regime, and one from times in COVID when things were extremely difficult. That's got us to the edge of losing subsidy again. So it only takes one or two items and then you're over the thresholds, if they're big items. Since since the identification of those two items, we haven't found similar ones like that. And we are checking, testing and focusing in areas where we think errors have been made in the past, certainly. So at the moment, we're hopeful. But as I say, it only takes one and back to square one.
So now we move to the exempt item. Now, as chairman, I move that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting for this item of business, on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information, as defined in Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, by virtue of paragraph 3. In brackets, information related to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. And Part 5, information in respect of which a claim to legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. And in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing this information. So could I ask all members of the public? Yeah, I need to have a vote. Councillors, kindly vote on this motion. All in favour? Thank you. Can I now ask members of the public to leave? And we turn off the YouTube. Right, okay, so that was agenda item 8, so we were asked to note the contents of the report. So we'll duly note that. So we now move on to item number 9, Treasury Management Activity and Prudential Indicators half-year report. I believe, Julian, you're going to give this report for us?
Yes, I'll just do a short, some short comments about things just think worth it drawing out. This is the regular half-year report we do, which is basically checking treasury management and capital expenditure potential indicators against an estimate we set for the year. So this is basically the half-year report. We're just going to look at the things which are slightly out of line with the estimates that we started with. The thing I'm going to start with is the capital programme. It's paragraph 3.2 on the report. I don't know what that page is, but it's we had an original estimate of our capital expenditure for this year of 12.7. It's now 17.4. What that's made up of is part of it is we had some capital budgets created for the local authority housing fund, which wasn't in the original budget. And also there's an increase due to the lease of our new headquarters in Albury House, because IFRS, we're implemented a new leasing standard, which means for leased assets you have to treat them almost as though you bought them, and we have to then put them in as capital expenditure as a one-off in 24-25. Originally, what was in there was the lease value for Parkside, which is much smaller than the Aubrey House, which is a much longer lease, because it's based, you calculate a right of use asset, we call it, which you actually have to put in your balance sheet as though it was an asset you bought. So basically that's a technical side, and that was 5.7 as opposed to 2.4, I think, was the estimate for this building under IFRS 16. So there's those two changes of the original estimate. That won't have a real effect, apart from we'll have to find some more financing for the amount of the local authority housing fund that wasn't financed by government. We get some grant, and then the balances we have to finance, and that will be financed by from our reserves. And that was the plan overall for the financing of the capital programme. In terms of any other items, the other capital finance and treasury management indicators were in line, apart from there was one instance where on the 1st of August, unfortunately, we went over our single bank limit because because of a staff error, we didn't make the necessary investments on that day, which meant we had too much money in the bank that night. We rectified it the next day, but we've looked at our processes. We've got some reminders in there, and we've done some retraining so everybody is aware of what the priorities are. I think what happened was there was some other distractions, which meant only part of the job was done and it wasn't completed on the day. But we've looked at that, and I think we've got a new set of training in there that hopefully will sort that out. In terms of the overall budget to Treasury, we're very close in terms of our Treasury management investments to the budget. Property income, we were slightly above the budget. I think there were some rent reviews during the year. Otherwise, there's nothing really, I think, to note apart from those things. Any questions? We have to answer.
Okay, any questions, members?
Yes, can I just ask a question about the sensitivity of these returns to the reduction in interest rates? Because clearly we've seen 2 reductions in base rate in the last few months, and notwithstanding the increase in inflation, which was reported recently, there had been an expectation of a further reduction before the end of the year and 2 further next year. What do you comment on the likelihood of those reductions impacting through into our investment?
At the moment, we're working with an estimate from our total, our treasury management advisors, they're giving us a sort of a reduction to 3.75, which at the end of next year, which I think is one or two more reductions next year. So that's the indication we've got around. That's what we have in the budget. Obviously, if it's it will benefit us if the rates stay up because we're a net investor. If it goes the other way, obviously we will lose some of our income. But at the moment, it looks like originally we were told it was going to go down 3%, but I think recently that's kind of been altered. So at the moment, we're working on getting to 3.75 at the end of next year. If it stays up, we have a benefit. If it goes down quicker than that, we will be under our budget for next year.
Over that's the aggregate level across all asset classes, or is that just on certain?
No, that's the base rate we're working with. So
right.
you know, so we have various elements. Some of them react to base rate, some don't. So that we estimate based on how much short-term money we have, and we say that's at the base rate. But we've got pooled funds which tend to stay at a certain level, and we've got some long-term investments. So there's a whole basket of different rates in there. Some are going to be fixed for the whole time, and some we usually do have quite a lot of money that's on variable rate on short-term rates, and those will benefit from any rates that are higher than the budget.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so at the moment on aggregate we're making 4.7. In the expectation the base rate falls to 3.75, would you like to estimate what the equivalent figure will be in a year's time if we do see that base rate? You've asked that one in advance.
I think it's true to say that we didn't expect interest rates to be this high, did we? So we've kind of benefited already from those higher rates, which at one point they weren't expected.
I mean, we had two good years, so to speak, where we didn't have the increases in. This year, 24-25, we kind of about where we thought we'd be. But obviously next year, it depends on the rate it goes down against our estimation. Oh yes, yeah. I mean, I don't think ABC is going back to those really low rates.
Okay, satisfied the answers. Okay, and that breach of overnight limit, that's all been put in. But the only other thing I would say, I had a short session on treasury management given by one of the officers, and it explained a lot to me as a non-financial person. So, you know, and I'm sure that's available to any other member who would like to take up the offer. Okay.
Yes, I mean, this is the corresponding thing that we were looking at for 24-25 just now, and looking at how we were doing against the estimates, and this is where we actually introduce the estimates for 25-26. So it gives an overall capital picture of how we're going to finance things, and it includes potential indicators which we set in order to give us a basis of knowing whether we're prudent and being sustainable in our financing. The estimate of the capital programme is what we've had at the moment. Obviously the budget hasn't gone through, so if there is change to the budget, there is a figure that goes in with the budget report, which has the last estimate of the capital programme and the financing of the capital programme. But this is based on what we have at the moment. I don't think there's going to be massive changes in the last few weeks because we're quite close to finalising the capital programme. There's no unfinanced spend for the next few years. We're using our own receipts, grants, or our own reserves. The expected monies to invest are going to reduce based on the fact we're spending money out on the capital programme. It doesn't go. It goes from about the £70 million mark to I think around 50 million at the moment. The projection is at the end of 27-28. We're not expecting to borrow at all in that period, so we're still using our own resources, like going out to the PWB or any other source. So, as I said, the final version of the indicators will be an appendix to the budget report, but this is the general gist of how financing will go and what the final projection indicators will be. In terms of any changes on the Treasury Management side, there is a change to the medium-term investing where we've increased it by 4 million for longer investments than 1 year. The idea there is to give us some headroom should there be enough funds available and should there be rates that are going to be high when interest rates are expected to fall. So it gives us a bit of leeway in case we find there are rates that are going to be far superior to what will be available in 2 or 3 years' time. It's worth us looking at those. I'm not saying we'll do them because obviously we have to be alive to the fact that have we got enough money for the commitments as they come due. But this gives us an idea of that. Gives us a bit of headroom to make investments that will keep some of the rates at the moment for longer. There's no big increases on the non-treasury, that's the property side, or the investments in non-treasury items. On investment properties, we continue to have a low vacancy rate, so we hope that the income from property will be up to where the estimate is. And we have taken some of the indicators out. There were some indicators we put in for property which were suggested in a government guidance, but they aren't key parts of the actual guidance that has to be in any report like this, or report on the potential indications on the investments. So we've taken some of those out. Some of them are reported elsewhere, like the vacancy rate is actually known by KPIs. So we've left a few that could be helpful because they tell you about things that aren't reported elsewhere. So that's all I'd like to say. Any questions?
Any questions, members? Linda?
So we're just in our heads trying to remember different things. So that Swan Walk is the difference between what we put into it originally and what we own now. Yeah.
So the reduction in the value.
Yeah,
is that as a consequence of the evaluation?
Yeah,
sale that took place.
Well, we don't have the sale in there. We have a revaluation every year of Swan Walk. It tends to be on the last accounts available from the Swan Walk management agents. We use that as a basis of valuing our part of Swan Walk.
That's a massive change, and that's not even taking into account inflation on the original 2006 figure.
No, I mean it's been. Yeah, I think the figure we have in there was a figure we took at a point when there was an accounting change, which I think was at the peak of retail valuations. So it's just retail valuations have just gone down rather steeply, and I think they now should be stabilising, but they've just, from when the baseline we took, I mean, that isn't, so the caveat about it, that is what we actually paid for Swan Walk is in the midst of time, because obviously it was put together various land parcels and bits of development over years back. But we picked, unfortunately, the 2007 when we picked that date, which is the worst date to pick because it was at the peak, and so everything's going to, whatever happens, it's going to go down. But it has gone down, really steep. But I think that's retail.
Will you revise what date you use going forward? Or is that always going to be the benchmark?
I think we always, I mean, that's the only point I think we can use, that's, because there was a valuation there that we know we can use as a baseline. Unfortunately, it's a baseline that we're always going to be below.
So the only other one I've bring is the retail research query forum.
Yeah, I think those are, I think some of the forum have also reduced. I mean, again, it's real retail and retail. It's just been hit all over. I mean, luckily we have a diversified portfolio, so that's some other things to compensate. I suppose that is the benefit, I suppose, of having at least a bit of a mixture in what you have.
Yeah, and like you say, we can show the rent that we pick up as an income elsewhere. So this is just the value of them, isn't it? This isn't how much they're worth to us overall.
Well, this is basically the valuation. Our valuer comes in and said this is the value at that point, and we use that as the end point. I mean, the income side stays fairly similar. It won't change. It stays fairly stable. It won't change, but the valuations take into account other things like yield, expected yields, and so forth. I'm not an valuation expert, but they may move when our income doesn't move because they're using their own sort of ways, the best of valuing properties.
Yeah, it's just in my head thinking, okay, we've got property where the value's gone down, but the income that we get, income stream on that is still static, as in steady, which is a good thing.
But it's still, the property value is still decreasing. Yeah. Further questions? No? Okay. Now, thank you. Julian, we are asked to approve the capital strategy as an overarching strategy for the council, while leaving full council to approve the updated capital strategy that will accompany the 25-26 budget to council. So can I have your agreements? Okay, the second part of this is now to recommend that full council approve the Treasury Management Strategy for 25-26 and associated limits and specific indicators, including Section 4 and Appendix B of the report. Do we agree? To recommend that full council approve the investment strategy for 25-26 and the associated limits and specific indicators, including Section 4 and Appendix C of this report. Now, do you agree with this? Thank you. Now we can move on to agenda item 11, urgent business. Does any person have any urgent business? Ah, yes. Yeah, the next audit meeting will be in February, on the 19th of February, to be precise, 5:30 in a conference room. So make sure we're aware of that. Do we all agree on that day?
Shall I explain the sort of context behind that? So this would be to sign off, hopefully, and approve the 23-24 accounts that need to be done by the deadline that's in this queue of backlog. So it's sort of an extra meeting just to deal with that item. If we wait until March, I think we miss the deadline. So
February the 19th. project, so that's all improving. Okay, so I'll close the meeting then. So meeting closes at 1832 minutes. If my watch is right, that is. Thank you very much for attending.